tutorial from Naeem Bukhari YouTube channel. So now today we are going to discuss lecture number 6 part C. So we are going to discuss autosomal recessive genetic disorders. Means what kind of autosomal recessive genetic disorders we can see. Okay, first we need to define or talk about autosomal recessive genetic disorders. Means what are autosomal recessive genetic disorders. As we discussed in previous lectures, we discussed autosomal dominant genetic disorders. In autosomal dominant genetic disorders, actually in parents body you can see the mutations. Means in the autosomal mutations are visible in parents bodily structures, कि जो parents हैं उनकी body के structure में आपको mutations visibly नज़र आती हैं, but एक parent में या दूसरे parent. But in case of autosomal recessive genetic disorders, you cannot observe the phenotypic effects of mutation in the parents. So this is a difference. So we are going to talk about it and we are going to study about it. Mating between two unaffected heterozygotes and the production of one or more homozygous offspring. मीन्स दो हेट्रोजाइगोट हमारे पास हैं, जब मेल एंड फीमेल उनका क्रॉस किया जाता है या मेटिंग होती है तो एट द एंड हमारे पास जो आगे ऑफस्प्रिंग होती हैं दे वुड बी होमोजाइगस ऑफस्प्रिंग्स. Typically the parents of an affected individuals are not affected but are genes carrier. अब ये बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट पॉइंट है कि हम लोगों के पास जो ऑटोसोमल रिसेसिव जेनेटिक डिसऑर्डर्स हैं उनमें क्या होता है कि पेरेंट्स अफेक्टेड नहीं होते, लेकिन जो चिल्ड्रंस होते हैं वो अफेक्टेड होते हैं. पेरेंट्स में वो फिनोटिपिक इफेक्ट्स क्योंकि जीन्स रिसेसिव फॉर्म में एग्जिस्ट कर रहे होते हैं, वो डिफेक्ट्स जो होते हैं वो फुली जीन्स खुद को एक्सप्रेस नहीं करते हैं, बट जो ऑफस्प्रिंग है वहाँ पे जाके जीन्स उनको अपने जो जीन्स हैं वो खुद को एक्सप्रेस कर लेते हैं. जब वो एक्सप्रेस करते हैं तो ऑफस्प्रिंग में हम जेनेटिक डिसऑर्डर्स ऑब्जर्व कर सकते हैं, राइट. As with the autosomal dominant inheritance, the proportion of affected males should be equal to the proportion of affected females in a given population. तो autosomal recessive genetic disorders का भी वही पैटर्न होना चाहिए जो कि autosomal dominant recessive genetic disorders का पैटर्न है, कि एक पॉपुलेशन में जितने फीमेल्स हैं autosomal recessive genetic disorders के उतने ही मेल्स भी होने चाहिए. So this pattern or this consensus should be conserved. So we can go and we can conduct some researches to find this one, because कि इनकी जो percentage होती है that is somehow constant as per Mendel law. Here we are going to discuss a detailed example of it. First we are going to discuss an example of autosomal recessive genetic disorders and a proper flow chart. Only we are going to discuss the first possibility. There will be variety of possibility can exist in autosomal genetic disorders. The first possibility, like there is a carrier father, okay, and then R. Here you can see this R represents X chromosome, Y chromosome, and this small R represents X chromosomes, right? Similarly, you can see over here these are the sexual chromosomes. We can just label here in case of mother, or these are just actually traits. ये हम इनको ट्रेड्स कंसिडर कर सकते हैं या जीन्स कह सकते हैं. अब यहाँ पे जो मदर है इसमें भी दो जीन्स हैं मौजूद हैं यहाँ पे, तो इसमें एक कैरियर है यहाँ पे और ये जो हमारे पास ये नॉर्मल है, राइट. अब जब ये आपस में इनका क्रॉस किया जाएगा या मैटिंग करवाई जाएगी तो यू कैन सी ओवर हियर वंस आर विल रिएक्ट विद आर देन देयर वुड बी अ नॉर्मल ऑफस्प्रिंग, ओके. That offspring should be a normal, and once this R reacts with this R then there would be a partially, we can say this one will be also a carrier, means ये भी disease carrier होगा, right. और फिर जब ये R इसके साथ R के साथ react करेगा, सॉरी ये small r जब इस कैप्स लॉक वाले जो R है कैपिटल R इसके साथ react करेगी तो यहाँ पे ये भी carrier है, और ये small r और ये small homozygous means recessive. This is homozygous recessive and this is a heterozygous dominant and this one is a heterozygous dominant character. तो हमारे पास यहाँ पे एक होमोजाइगस डोमिनेंट आ गया, हेट्रोजाइगस डोमिनेंट एंड हेट्रोजाइगस रिसेसिव. सो इफ वी विल डिक्लेयर what are the overall chances or what is the overall probability of autosomal recessive genetic disorders, so that is a homozygous autosomal recessive disorder, that is 25%. If we will discuss heterozygous autosomal dominant disorders then it would be a 50%, and if we will discuss homozygous recessive genetic disorders then it would be homozygous we can say homozygous dominant genetic disorders, then there would be a 25% chances. So in overall, if we can discuss, so this one is actually a normal, and overall there are 75% chances, means there are 75% of genetic or autosomal recessive genetic disorders if both father and mother are carrier. If one of them is carrier, so there would be a autosomal dominant genetic disorders. If both of them are carrier, then we declare them autosomal recessive genetic disorders as well. So here we are going to see or observe pedigree. Here you can see this one represents one parent, this one represents one parent, this one represent is a carrier of disease, and this parent is also a carrier of disease. In next generation, what will be happening? Only one we can say one boy or one children would be a normal. For rest, here you can see this one is abnormal. Okay, sorry, this daughter was abnormal, this daughter was normal, and this son was abnormal, and further this son was abnormal and this daughter was also abnormal. In next generation one, this son will be abnormal, son will mate with a normal we can say woman. What will be happening in next generation? They will become carrier. Okay, the children will be, all of the children will become carrier. So this is a pedigree of autosomal recessive genetic disorders, means in F2 we can say all of the offspring will become the carrier of autosomal recessive genetic disorders, and then the cycle will repeat like over here. Okay, and this will further multiply, and the chances of diseased person or disease will multiply at a greater extent. So this was all about autosomal recessive genetic disorders. If we discuss some of the example of autosomal recessive genetic disorders, those example includes like sickle cell anemia disease, okay, cystic fibrosis, and metabolic disease like albinism. So these are the examples of autosomal recessive genetic disorders. So sickle cell anemia, in sickle cell anemia, as you know, due to these genetic defects, like there were mother or fathers were carrier of the disease, then we can say sickle cell anemia disease will appear, where RBC's formation will be improper. In case of cystic fibrosis, there would be a cancer or a tumor production. So that is also due to autosomal recessive genetic disorders, in which parents were the carrier of the disease. And metabolic disease like albinism, like where albumin production related disorders are actually discussed. So these are example diseases of autosomal recessive genetic disorders. So if you have any questions, you can ask your questions. Stay tuned. Looking forward for moving forward for another kind of lecture.